Hello everyone, this is Serious Trivia, and today we're continuing our What's in a Chinese Name series with episode 2, where we will cover the concepts of first name and style name. Now, in our last episode, we talked about Xing and Shi, which are concepts of surname and clan name, and today we'll shift our focus to the more personalized part of one's name in first name and style name. And because first names can be so personalized, there are not a lot of rules regarding them, as your parents can choose to name you whatever they please. Oftentimes, for wealthy and educated families, the parents might pick a character or a few characters with certain meaning. Perhaps it is a virtue they want you to live by, or simply a wish for you to stay healthy. And for the poor and uneducated families, one's first name might just be related to events around your birth. For example, the first emperor of the Ming dynasty, Zhu Yuanzhang, was born to a poor farmer's family, and his birth name was not actually Zhu Yuanzhang, but rather Zhu Chongba. And the rationale behind naming him as Chongba is simply because for his father's generation, there were two boys, his father and his uncle, and all their kids were given the names Chongyi, Chong'er, Chongsan, Chongsi, Chongwu, and so forth, where the first character is always Chong, and the second character is numbers 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, where he is 8, Zhu Chongba. And the meaning behind this is rather simple. Chong has the meaning of pregnancy, so they are simply the first pregnancy, second pregnancy, third, fourth, until he is the 8th pregnancy in the family. So he's the 8th oldest kid in his generation. And this type of naming during the Yuan and Ming dynasty would be seen as a low-class practice. So it is no surprise that he would go on to change his name to Zhu Yuanzhang later on in life. But if we look back in history, before the Zhou dynasty, first names did not have any set conventions, even among the wealthy and well-educated families, and they would name their kids simply based on the events surrounding their birth. Take someone famous like Confucius, whose birth name was not Confucius or Kongzi as he is known in Chinese. Now, unrelated to that title, which is sort of an honorary title given to him later on, his surname was actually Zi, and his clan name was Kong, which we discussed in our last episode, as they were separate surnames and clan names during the pre-Qin period, and his actual first name was actually Qiu, which means hill. And the rationale behind this first name was simply because when Confucius was born, the back of his head curved like the hill behind his house. So he was given the name Qiu, which means hill. Now, of course, this type of naming did change eventually during the spring-autumn period, as the kingdom of Lu would push for the first set of naming etiquettes called Wu Zi, or the 5 standards, which outline the 5 types of first names to avoid. And the 5 standards are called Xin, Yi, Xiang, Jia, Lei. Xin here is the avoidance of naming after the time of birth, whether that is using a date, a month, a season, an hour, or a year as the name. Then Yi is the avoidance of naming after weather phenomena during birth, whether it's something as simple as rain or as rare as an eclipse. Then for Xiang, it is the avoidance of naming after resemblance, such as Confucius' name of Qiu, due to the fact that his head is shaped like a hill. Then Jia is the avoidance of naming after objects. And lastly, Lei is the avoidance of naming after something related to one's father. So Western style names like Johnson or Erickson, as well as being called George III, would all fall under this type of avoidance rule. Then, with the rise of Confucianism during the Warring State period, 6 additional rules called the Liu Bu, or the 6 no's, were also added, where one should not be named after the names of kingdoms, the names of government positions, the names of mountains and valleys, the names of diseases, the names of animals, and the names of coinage or currency. Now, with these basic rules in place, the rest is really up to you, when naming your kids. And of course, during different periods, certain types of names would be in style depending on other things happening culturally at the time. For example, during the Xin dynasty that divided the Western and Eastern Han dynasty, the emperor then, Wang Mang, stated that single character names followed Confucian etiquette. So this is why for the majority of the Eastern Han dynasty, as well as the Three Kingdoms period, almost everyone had single character names. Then during the Wei Jin period, the philosophical study of Xuanxue became increasingly popular, and people started to add the character zhi at the end of names to reflect this, which is why we have famous poet Wang Xizhi, famous artist Gu Kaizhi, famous general Liu Laozhi, famous scientist Zhu Chongzhi, famous scholar Yan Yanzhi, and famous historian Pei Songzhi, who is the one who contributed to writing the records of Three Kingdoms during this period. Then in the North-South dynasties that followed, Buddhism finally entrenched itself in China, and certain characters related to Buddhism, like the character for monk called Seng, became increasingly popular. And from all the officials during the North-South dynasties, over 122 of them would have this character in their name, reflecting on its popularity, especially among the more elite gentry clans. Then by the Tang Song period, using characters that had the 5 elements or the 5 phases within the structure of the character became in fashion. Now, what I mean by that is people didn't just look at the character for fire, water, wood, earth, and metal directly, but rather look for the inclusion of these 5 element characters as part of a more complex character. So for example, if we look at a metal related character, we might have the following, where all the left side of the character contain the character for the element gold. Or we could have these characters here, where the 3 dots on the left side of the structure for the characters is the symbol for water. And the goal for using these 5 elements as part of your name is to use the cycle for each generation. For example, if my generation all use characters with elements of water, then for our next generation in our family, all the kids would use elements of wood, as wood is nurtured and born from water. And then the following generation would use fire, since fire is fueled and born from wood, and the cycle continues. Then by the late Song period, the idea of using the first character in your first name to denote your entire generation became in fashion, where clans would keep track of their lineage by assigning an exact character to each generation, so that now your name is made up of your surname, your generational character, followed by a character of your parents' choice. And this custom would actually stay relevant all the way to present day even for some families, including my own, as the second character of my full name or the first character of my first name is shared among my siblings and cousins. Then, during the Republic of China period, following the Qin dynasty, the Western influences entered China, and names that sounds like Western names, like Ma Li for Mary, Hai Lun for Helen, Pide for Peter, Yue Han for John, and Tang Mu for Tom, all became popular for a time. And if we look to the early stages of the People's Republic of China, especially during the Cultural Revolution, using names with the character Hong for red or communism, Jian for building or rebuilding, Wei for defending or guarding, and Zhong for loyalty and patriotism, all became quite popular components of names. And lastly, if we look to today, classical names with poetic meanings are somewhat making a comeback, and there's also a movement for multiple character first names that goes beyond the traditional 1 or 2 characters, but it's more or less freedom for the parents to pick what they like. And speaking of traditional things, something that is no longer used in modern times is style name, or zi. And there is really no Western equivalent to draw parallels here, but zi Often translated as style name, is historically what Chinese people use as their name in place of their first name, as in ancient times, referring to someone directly by their first name was seen as a rude gesture. And oftentimes, first names were private and only known by one's family and those close to them. And girls in ancient time would often never even get a first name, but instead will get a baby name or family nickname before they reach the age of 15, when they would have their coming of age ceremony, and then they will get a style name. And this is the reason why in Three Kingdoms, all the notable women are referred to as Lady This or Lady That, because they usually didn't have an official first name, and no historical document will record their baby name or family nickname. Luckily, there are a few recorded style names in the case of Guo Nuwang, who was Cao Pi's wife and the first empress of Wei, simply because her style name of Nuwang actually means queen or empress. And historians felt that this was interesting enough to record, as her father had the foresight to name her that when she was just 15. Now, for boys at the time, the coming of age is officially 20 years old when you would receive a crowning ceremony, where you get this special hat signifying adulthood. And this is when you will receive your style name from either your father or your teacher, as this was very much a Confucian custom. And while this tradition is all but gone today, as style name died out around the time of Cultural Revolution, or the 1950s, 60s, pretty much no one uses style name today, we still have a coming of age ceremony that's been preserved under the Confucian tradition, except it's not in China, but in Japan, as they still have a coming of age ceremony for all the 20-year-olds every January. And this is a carryover from the Confucian tradition that passed to Japan from China long time ago. And historically, though, the coming of age for boys was not strictly enforced at 20, as the main purpose of this ceremony was to signify adulthood, where the kid is now a man and able to move out of a parent's house to have his own estate and get married. So oftentimes, this coming of age would actually happen much earlier, especially given the life expectancy of time, as boys often got married when they were closer to 16. But more importantly for our discussion here, style names are usually picked in 3 ways. First off, no matter which way you go, it is almost always related to your first name, as the purpose of the style name is to replace your first name in public. So the most common way to pick a style name is to pick characters that represent the same meaning as your first name. So using Three Kingdom examples, we have Zhuge Liang, whose first name is Liang, which means bright. So his style name of Kongming actually means extreme brightness, amplifying the meaning of his first name. And if we look at his older brother, Zhuge Jin, Jin is a word that comes from the phrase Jinyu, which means a beautiful piece of jade. And this is why his style name would end up being Ziyu. And Zi is often a filler word that you would throw in there when you needed a 2-character name for a style name, but you didn't have a good choice for the first word. So you can just think of this as Yu, and this completes his phrase, Jinyu, beautiful jade. So using either part of this can refer to that beautiful jade. And we see this with Zhou Yu as well, because he has the other half of Jinyu. So guess what he picked for his style name? Gong Jin, because he already had Yu in his first name. So now he's looking for Jin in his style name to complete the phrase. Then the second way to pick a style name is to pick characters that offer an extension of the meaning. So for example, here we have Zhao Yun, whose first name of Yun means cloud. So his style name of Zilong actually is just Long, because we said if you have Zi as the first character, it means that you're just looking for a filler word in here. And 龙 means dragon, because dragons flies amongst the cloud. And that's the extension of a word in his first name to give meaning to something related in his style name. And this is similar for 太史慈 as well. 太史慈's first name of 慈 means kindness or love, especially from a parent. And his style name of 子义, if we throw away the 子, simply means virtuous. And in this case, a virtuous son who gives the idea of a filial pious son and has the virtue to love one's parent who's showing him kindness and love. So it's a callback or extension to the meaning in his first name. And then finally, the third way of picking a style name is picking a character that offers the opposite meaning of one's first name. And you would do this because once you reach 20, or whenever you have your coming of age, your parents or your teacher might think that you grew up to be very different from what your name suggested. And since you're not changing your name, you're basically going to give an opposite meaning to reflect the person that you have become. So for example, we have Lü Meng, whose first name of Meng means cloudy or lost. So his style name of Ziming, once again, throwaway filler word, we have left with Ming, which means brightness. And that provides the opposite meaning of being cloudy or lost, and it helps guide him from being lost. Gan Ning is another case of this, where his first name of Ning actually means harmony. And his style name is Xing Ba, which means glorious hegemon. And it's exactly the opposite meaning, as his father or teacher probably realized that by the time Gan Ning was 20, that he was not going to be a quiet kid, or perhaps that the chaos springing up around the time required a more forceful touch rather than a harmonious one. And of course, lastly, there are always going to be those parents who will ignore all the rules. For example, Sima Yi's father, Sima Fang, who had 8 sons in total, and when he had to pick out style names for them, he got really lazy. He used the standard technique of ordering characters using 伯仲叔季, which is the first character signifying the firstborn son, secondborn, thirdborn, fourthborn, which we can also use Sun Ce's family as an example of, since they had 4 sons as well. And then for the second character for the Sima clan, he picked Da for everyone. So literally all 8 of his sons had Da as the second character for their style name, and the first character just basically ranks them. So it's the first dot, second dot, third dot, fourth dot, had nothing to do with their first names. And with this, we're going to end our episode here, as we'll come back tomorrow to conclude this series, as we'll talk about Hao and Shi, which are nicknames and posthumous names. So hopefully you all enjoy this episode, and I'll see you all then. Bye!